They say Christmas is the season of joy, but mine began with frost crawling across the inside of my windshield and the sound of carolers singing faintly from a house I could no longer enter. While neighbors feasted and exchanged gifts under glowing trees, I was curled up in the front seat of my beat-up car, starving, trembling so violently that my teeth rattled. Snow pressed against the glass like a shroud, and each breath came out in white bursts that vanished into the darkness. I had no food, no warmth, no home. My parents had cut me off, drained my accounts, and with one cruel twist of a key, they had changed the locks on the house I grew up in. I begged them not to, but my father's eyes were cold as steel when he said, "Emily, you need to learn to grow up. This is not a hotel for freeloaders." His new wife, Linda, stood behind him, satisfied arms folded as if she had finally erased me. And Michael, my brother, who once defended me from schoolyard bullies, stared at the floor, refusing to meet my eyes, letting my exile happen in silence. That silence hurt worse than the icy air that cut into my lungs. I thought of my mother gone now for years, her promise echoing in my head. Your father will always take care of you, but promises die when the people behind them choose convenience over love. That night, I sat in that lot behind a cheap motel, the flickering neon sign mocking me with its promise of vacancy and warmth. I had no credit card anymore. My father had seen to that. In my pocket lay a few crumpled dollars, not enough for food and heat. My stomach clenched with hunger until the pain felt like knives, and my hands were so numb I could not feel the steering wheel. I pressed them to my mouth, desperate for any trace of warmth. Outside, families were singing Silent Night. Inside my car, my silent night was the kind you do not wake from. Tears burned against my frozen cheeks as I realized I was less than nothing to the people who had once called me family. I was disposable and inconvenience, a burden to be tossed away like trash on Christmas Eve. For a moment, I thought about giving in, closing my eyes, letting the cold carry me away. But something fierce rose inside me. They thought they had destroyed me, that they had buried me in snow and silence. They thought locking me out meant locking me down forever. They could not see the truth. That night, in the darkest hour, starving and shaking on Christmas, a spark lit in me that no frost could kill. I did not know yet how, but I would not be erased. One day, the world would hear my side, and when it did, my survival would be the sharpest answer to their betrayal. Before that Christmas night when everything fell apart, my story had already been bleeding quietly for years. My name is Emily Carter, and I was born into a family that looked respectable from the outside. We lived in a comfortable house in Ohio. My father owned a share in a small but growing food business, and my mother filled the house with warmth. She was the kind of woman who baked pies for the neighbors, planted flowers that bloomed every spring, and believed in traditions. Christmas had always been sacred to her. She strung the lights herself even when her hands were trembling from illness. Cancer crept into her body when I was 16, and during those final months, she whispered promises that my father would protect me, that our family would never let me down, that her recipes and her love would always be my safety net. She passed just before my 17th birthday, and with her, the light in our home dimmed. 11 months later, my father Thomas remarried. Her name was Linda. She swept into our lives, polished, charming, and hungry for control. She came with her own daughter Sophie, who was just 19, and although she seemed sweet at first, she quickly learned to keep her head down and follow her mother's lead. My older brother Michael, who had once carried me on his shoulders and teased me in the playful way brothers do, was in his late 20s then. He was ambitious, desperate for my father's approval, and he decided that siding with Linda was the surest way to secure his inheritance and his role in the family business. From the beginning, small signs appeared. The framed photos of Mom and me decorating Christmas cookies disappeared from the walls, replaced with generic hotel art Linda claimed looked more modern. Her cookbooks vanished from the shelves. The garden where Mom spent summers planting tomatoes was torn up for sleek landscaping. Each little erasure was like another funeral, but I stayed silent. I promised Mom I would be patient, that I would hold on and not cause fights. Then came the conversations about responsibility. Linda would say at dinner, "Thomas, do you think Emily is contributing enough to the household?" Her tone sweet, but her eyes sharp. I was only 17, still in school, but my father began repeating her words. "Maybe you should get a job, Emily. It would be good for you." So I did. I started working at a small coffee shop, wiping counters after class, pouring lattes for people who barely noticed me saving every dollar because something deep inside whispered that I might need it. At first, it felt manageable. I told myself I was proving I could be strong independent. But then the financial complications began. My college account that my mother had built started to shrink with explanations about business restructuring and tax issues. Linda's voice always threaded through those explanations, smooth and reasonable, while her daughter suddenly had new clothes and gadgets. Michael backed them both, telling me I should not expect everything to be handed to me. I was too naive to realize the trap being set. Slowly, the house stopped feeling like mine. My father's laughter at the dinner table was now for Linda's benefit. My opinions carried no weight. I felt like a guest in the place where I grew up. By the time I turned 20, Linda had convinced him I was ungrateful and spoiled. Thomas started looking at me not with love, but with irritation, as though my presence itself was an inconvenience. Linda took over Mom's sewing room and turned it into her personal dressing space racks of expensive clothes, replacing the fabrics and threads that smelled of Mom's hands. I remember standing in the doorway, my chest tight, watching the transformation, but I said nothing. My silence was mistaken for weakness. Over the next few years, the gaslighting became more vicious. Linda told me I was lazy even while I worked double shifts. She said I was living off my father when in truth he had started cutting back his support, citing her endless arguments about finances. Michael joined the chorus saying adults should stand on their own, that I was embarrassing him. I began to feel cornered in every conversation like three voices against mine. Still, I clung to small fragments of Mom that I had saved in boxes in the basement, recipe cards, and a few photographs. They were my anchor, but Linda noticed that too. She began throwing out things that carried Mom's scent, dismissing them as clutter. It was as if she wanted to erase not just my mother's memory, but also the version of me connected to her. The tension in the house thickened until even Sophie avoided eye contact, trapped between loyalty to me and fear of defying her mother. Every holiday grew more strained. Thanksgiving dinners felt like staged performances. By the time Christmas rolled around the year before everything exploded, I already knew in my gut that I was being pushed out piece by piece. When the final blow came and they told me the locks had been changed, I should not have been surprised. But betrayal always cuts deepest when you still hold a shred of hope. I had hoped my father would remember his promise to my mother. I had hoped my brother would stand up for me. I had hoped Linda's cruelty would have a limit. I was wrong. That background, all those small cuts leading up to one brutal night, shaped the woman I became. The Emily who was thrown into the snow was quiet and trusting. The Emily who would rise again was forged in the silence of erasure, in the humiliation of being told she was nothing, in the aching emptiness of holidays turned cold. That was the foundation of my story, the roots of the storm that would later tear my family's facade apart. By the time I turned 24, the house that was once filled with laughter had become a battleground where every small action carried judgment and every word felt like a trap. I would return from long shifts at the coffee shop, exhausted, but proud of the few dollars I had saved, and Linda would be waiting in the kitchen arranging flowers that cost more than a week of my wages. She would tilt her head and say with that syrupy tone, "Thomas, do you think Emily is really learning responsibility, or is she still leaning on you too much?" My father would glance at me with tired eyes, then nod slowly as though convinced by her performance. Michael, already working alongside my father in the business, would chime in with his sharp voice. "She is almost 25, Dad. If she cannot handle herself now, when will she?" Those words cut deeper than any blade. It was not just Linda trying to erase me anymore. My own brother had chosen her side completely. Sophie, younger and quieter, would sometimes catch my eye with guilt, but she never spoke up. Fear kept her silent. The erosion of my place in the family was slow, deliberate, and cruel. First, they took away my mother's things. Then they took away my room, calling it wasted space. Finally, they took away my sense of belonging, turning every dinner into an interrogation about bills, savings, and responsibility. When I tried to defend myself, they accused me of being dramatic. Linda would laugh softly and say, "Emily always wants to be the victim," and my father would sigh as if agreeing. Gaslighting became the air I breathed. I started questioning my own worth. Was I really ungrateful? Was I really a burden? But deep inside, a fire grew with every cutting remark. I watched as Linda redecorated the house with expensive furniture while claiming money was tight. I watched as Michael drove a new company car while my savings account mysteriously shrank. I noticed how Sophie's tuition was suddenly covered in full while I struggled to pay for textbooks. I wanted to scream, but my voice was swallowed by their united front. The cruelest moment came one December evening, just days before Christmas. I returned from my shift with snow still clinging to my coat. In the living room, Linda was cramming my clothes into black trash bags. Not folding them, not packing them neatly, but shoving them like garbage. "What are you doing?" I demanded, panic rising. She looked up with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Oh, good you are home. We need to talk." My father sat slumped in his chair, staring at his hands, refusing to meet my gaze. "Thomas and I have decided it is time for you to be independent," Linda announced. "You are an adult now, and this is not a hotel." My heart pounded as I turned to my father. "Dad, you are really going to let her do this? You are really going to throw me out in the middle of winter?" His eyes lifted slowly, and what I saw killed something inside me. Not love, not concern, only weariness. "Emily, he said your mother protected you too much. You need to learn to stand on your own." My chest burned as if a fire was tearing me apart. "Mom loved me," I shouted. "She cared for me. There is a difference." Linda's mask slipped and her voice turned sharp. "Your mother is dead, Emily, and so is her fantasy of you being some spoiled princess. This is my house now, and I will not allow a grown woman to act like a child under my roof." Then she reached into a trash bag and pulled out the wooden jewelry box my mother had given me, the one with the small ballerina inside. Without breaking eye contact, she dumped the contents onto the coffee table. Pearls scattered, my mother's wedding ring clinked against the wood treasures, turned to trinkets in seconds. "These baubles should have been sold years ago," Linda sneered, holding up the ring. "Thomas, we could get good money for this." I lunged forward, desperate, but she lifted the ring high. "These belong to the estate now. Your father is executor." My father nodded miserably. "Emily, be reasonable. These are just objects." Just objects. I felt my throat close with rage. They were not objects. They were memories, promises, love carved into metal and stone. But my protests meant nothing. Linda dropped the ring back onto the table and said coldly, "You have 5 minutes to take what you can carry and get out. 5 minutes." Snow was already falling outside. My voice cracked. "Where am I supposed to go?" "That is not my problem anymore," she said, already moving toward the door. "Thomas, help her with the bags." My father stood but did not meet my eyes. The final blow came the next morning when I tried to access my savings account. It was empty. The account that was supposed to hold nearly $50,000 for my future had been transferred entirely into a company fund controlled by my father and Linda. I realized then this was not just rejection. This was erasure, financial strangulation, a calculated destruction of my independence. They wanted me powerless, voiceless, gone. That December, in the days leading to Christmas, my life collapsed not with one loud explosion, but with a series of quiet betrayals. My home was no longer mine. My savings were gone. My father had chosen control over love. My brother had chosen ambition over loyalty. My stepmother had chosen greed over humanity, and I was left standing in the snow with trash bags for luggage and a future carved out of ice. The night everything collapsed was December 24th, Christmas Eve, the time when families across the city were gathering around tables heavy with food, when lights blinked from every window and hymns filled the air. For me, it was the night I became homeless. I left the house with nothing but 2 garbage bags of clothes and a quarter tank of gas in my old Subaru. Snow was falling hard, the kind that blinds you as it whirls in the headlights, the kind that muffles sound so the world feels like a tomb. My breath turned the car into a foggy cave, the heater struggling against the storm until the fuel needle sank lower and lower. I pulled into the parking lot of a rundown motel, the kind with peeling paint and flickering neon that buzzed in the dark. Inside the office, I could see a woman in a sweater pouring coffee, warm air spilling every time the door opened. My hands trembled as I reached into my pocket. $17. That was all. Enough for one night inside, maybe, but then nothing left for food or gas. I stood there in the cold, staring at the door at the promise of warmth I could not afford before shame pushed me back to my car. I climbed inside, pulled my thin coat tighter, and tried to convince myself I would figure something out tomorrow. Hunger gnawed at me like sharp teeth. I had skipped meals before to save money, but this was different. This was the kind of hunger that made my head spin, that made every sound distant. My stomach cramped so hard I folded over the steering wheel, fighting tears. From a nearby house I heard laughter, the clink of glasses and voices singing Silent Night. The cruel irony sliced through me. Their silent night was joy. Mine was silence of another kind, the silence of being forgotten. I thought of Mom, then her soft hands, her promises, and for the first time I realized she had not been wrong about love. She had simply trusted the wrong person to carry it forward. My father had taken that trust and twisted it into something cruel. Around midnight, the storm thickened. Snow piled high against the tires. The car became a coffin of ice. I turned the ignition to run the heater, but the gauge warned me fuel was almost gone. I let it run for 10 minutes, feeling the heat kiss my numb fingers, then shut it off again to save what little remained. The cold returned instantly, crawling into my bones, seizing my chest until every breath hurt. I tucked my hands under my arms, pulled my knees to my chest, and rocked myself like a child. Images flashed through my mind. Mom at the Christmas tree. Sophie shyly handing me a handmade card, even Michael chasing me in the yard when we were young. All of it gone now, swallowed by greed and betrayal. The hours crept by, marked only by the rhythm of shivers that grew weaker and weaker. At some point, I must have drifted into a haze, half awake, half gone, because I remember staring at the motel sign, blinking. Vacancy, vacancy, like a heartbeat mocking me. I whispered to myself, if I sleep, I will not wake. And part of me wondered if that would be easier. But then anger rose hot, even in the freezing air. They had thrown me out like garbage stolen, my future laughed as they locked the door. Was I really going to give them the satisfaction of winning? No! I clenched my fists until my nails cut into my palms. Tears slid down my frozen skin, not just of pain, but of fury. That fury was the only warmth I had left. Dawn came gray and bitter. Cars pulled in and out of the lot, strangers hurrying inside, to warmth no one looking twice at the girl shivering in the Subaru. My lips were cracked, my throat dry, my body weak. I forced myself to sit upright to face the truth. This was my reality. Homeless on Christmas Eve, starving in a motel lot abandoned by the people meant to love me most. That was the moment I knew I had fallen to the lowest point a daughter can reach, betrayed not by strangers, but by blood. And though I did not know it then, that night of despair would become the line dividing my old self from the new. The girl who begged to stay had died in that car. The woman who would rise was born in the silence of that Christmas night. The days that followed were the longest of my life, each one a test of how much a person can endure before breaking. After that first night in the motel lot, I realized survival was not going to be about comfort. It was going to be about grit. I learned quickly which gas stations had the cleanest bathrooms where I could wash my face and change clothes without drawing too much attention. I learned which fast food places would let me sit for hours nursing a single small coffee without kicking me out. I learned how to stretch $1 until it nearly tore. Each morning, I dragged myself from the car with aching limbs pasted on a fake smile and went to work at the coffee shop as though everything was normal. No one knew that after my shift ended, I had nowhere to go. I would stay as long as possible cleaning counters, sweeping floors, pretending I had somewhere waiting for me. When the last light went off and I stepped back into the cold, the truth would settle heavy in my chest again. My car became my bedroom closet and shelter all at once. I stuffed trash bags of clothes into the back seat, layering everything I owned onto my body when the temperature dropped. Some nights I woke to frost crusting the inside of the windows, my breath hanging in the air like smoke. The cold was a living thing pressing down on me, squeezing the strength out of my bones. Hunger was my constant companion. I rationed what little I had, nibbling on crackers or day-old pastries the shop sometimes let employees take home. My stomach shrank until every pang felt like knives twisting deep inside. But I told no one. Pride kept my mouth shut. Pride and the certainty that Linda and my father would relish my suffering if they knew. The cruelest part was watching from a distance how easily they carried on without me. One evening, as I drove past the old house, I saw them through the window lights blazing. Linda and Michael laughing as they carried bags from expensive stores, Sophie trailing behind with downcast eyes. They had already redecorated, erasing any trace that I had lived there. It was as if I had never existed. Later, I scrolled through social media on the cracked phone I could barely keep charged and saw posts that made my stomach twist. Photos of Linda and my father smiling on a trip to Aspen champagne glasses raised the caption reading, "Family is everything so blessed." Beneath it, Michael had commented, "Couldn't agree more." The hypocrisy nearly suffocated me. They were celebrating my absence, flaunting their luxury while I sat in a frozen car, trying not to starve. Each image fueled the fire inside me. Still, survival demanded more than anger. I began mapping out safe places to sleep. Church parking lots felt less dangerous. A 24-hour grocery store allowed me to blend in. I kept a blanket rolled tight in the trunk and a flashlight for when the darkness felt unbearable. The car itself, an old Subaru my mother had left behind, was the only piece of her I still possessed. I clung to it as fiercely as I clung to breath. As the weeks dragged on, my body weakened. I developed a cough that rattled my chest fevers that left me sweating even in the icy air. Some mornings I woke too stiff to move my fingers swollen and raw, yet I forced myself to keep going. Each day I showed up at work determined to hide the truth, because to admit it would be to admit defeat. At night I lay awake listening to the storm beat against the metal roof, whispering prayers into the darkness. I asked my mother to give me strength to remind me I was still her daughter, not the worthless burden they claimed I was. The prayers did not bring food or warmth, but they kept me alive. And then there was the constant war inside me, the part that wanted to give up to surrender to the cold, and the part that burned with stubbornness. I told myself over and over, if I survive this, I will make them pay. If I survive this, I will never let them erase me again. That vow became my fuel when hunger drained me, when loneliness clawed at me, when I wondered if anyone would notice if I disappeared. Christmas passed, then New Year's, and still I endured. Each day that I woke in that car was proof that they had not destroyed me completely. Each breath was defiance. Each shiver was resistance. They wanted me gone, but I was still here, clinging to life with frostbitten hands, waiting for something to change. By the third week of living in my car, my body was running on fumes. The cough in my chest grew harsher, each breath scraping my lungs like sandpaper, and my fever spiked until sweat froze against my skin. I knew I could not last much longer, but I kept forcing myself to hold on. Then one afternoon, as I sat slumped in the driver's seat parked behind that same motel where the neon sign buzzed endlessly, I heard frantic knocking on the window. My vision was blurred, but through the glass I saw Sophie's face, pale and terrified. Emily opened the door. "Please," she cried. I struggled with the lock until she yanked the door open and cold air rushed in. She gasped when she saw me. "You are freezing. You look half dead." Her hands shook as she pulled at my arm. "You cannot stay here. Come with me." For the first time since that night, I let someone else carry some of my weight. Sophie bundled me into her car and turned the heat to full blast. As we drove away, I broke down sobbing uncontrollably, words tumbling out about hunger and nights so cold I thought I would not wake. Sophie's own eyes filled with tears. "I am so sorry, Emily," she whispered. "I wanted to stop them, but Mom threatened me, and Dad said if I defended you, he would cut me off too." I hated myself for staying quiet. I could barely speak, but I gripped her hand. "You are here now. That is what matters." She took me to our Aunt Margaret's small house on the edge of town. Margaret was my mother's sister, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and a backbone forged from years of hardship. She had never liked Linda, and now I understood why. When she opened the door and saw me shivering, she pulled me inside without a word, wrapping a quilt around my shoulders. Lord above, she muttered, they let you rot out there like an animal. She set me in a chair by the fire, pressed a hot mug into my hands, and glared at Sophie. Tell me everything. Sophie explained in a trembling voice how Linda and Dad had insisted I was gone, how they told everyone I had taken off on my own. Margaret's eyes narrowed, fury flashing. That lying witch, she spat. She wanted to erase your mother, and now she is trying to erase you. Not while I breathe. Over the next few days, Margaret nursed me back to health with soup and medicine, but she also revealed something that shifted the ground beneath my feet. She led me to her attic and pulled out an old recipe box that had belonged to my mother. Inside, beneath faded index cards, was a small key and a folded note. In my mother's handwriting, it read, "For Emily when she is ready to fight back." My hands shook as I held the key. Margaret explained it opened a safety deposit box downtown. Your mother was not blind, Emily, she said softly. She knew Linda was circling like a vulture. She knew your father could be swayed, so she made sure you would have protection when the time came. With Sophie by my side, we went to the bank the next day. Inside, the safety deposit box was a treasure of truth. There was my mother's real will properly notarized, leaving me controlling interest in the family company and a trust fund that had mysteriously vanished under Dad and Linda's care. There were letters she had written describing her fears about Linda's influence. There was even a small recorder containing voicemails Mom had saved of financial discussions, proof that Linda had been meddling from the start. Most damning of all was a thick folder compiled by Eleanor, the company's longtime accountant, who had worked secretly with my mother. Every transfer, every forged signature, every theft was documented with meticulous precision. Margaret's eyes gleamed as I flipped through the pages. Your mother was smarter than they knew, she said. She saw the storm coming, and she left you the weapons to fight it. Sophie squeezed my hand. Emily, you cannot let them get away with this. At that moment, weak but alive, I felt the spark inside me flare into flame. They had thrown me out to die, stolen everything, and celebrated my absence. But my mother had left me the truth, and the truth was power. I looked at Margaret, at Sophie, and said with a voice steadier than I felt, I am ready. I want them to pay. Holding my mother's will and the thick folder of documents in my hands felt like standing at the edge of a battlefield with weapons finally in reach. For years, I had endured their control and their cruelty without proof, only instincts and whispers. Now I had evidence cold and undeniable. Margaret sat across from me at the kitchen table, her eyes sharp with determination. Emily, your mother knew Linda would not waste time. She asked Eleanor to keep parallel records so you would not be left defenseless. Sophie leaned in, scanning the papers with wide eyes. It is all here, she said. Transfers, dates, everything. They stole not only your college fund but employee pensions money meant for the very people who kept the business alive. Reading the records made my stomach churn. Every luxury bag Linda flaunted, every glass of champagne they toasted was bought with stolen futures. I traced my mother's handwriting on the will and felt her presence as though she were whispering that she still had my back. I imagined Linda's face when this truth came to light, and it gave me strength I had not felt in years. Eleanor, the accountant, met me a few days later at a small cafe far from the city center. She was a precise woman in her 50s, her hair pulled into a neat bun, her eyes sharp with intelligence. Your mother asked me to protect you, she said as she slid more files across the table. She suspected Linda almost immediately after the funeral. I kept copies of every suspicious transfer. I have been waiting for you to turn 18, then 21, then older, but when you disappeared last month, I feared the worst. I told her everything from being thrown out to nearly freezing in my car, and for the first time her composure cracked. Her jaw tightened, her voice lowered. They will pay for this. Legally, publicly, thoroughly. My hands trembled as I flipped through the documents. There were bank statements showing hundreds of thousands moved into Linda's personal account, contracts altered with my father's signature scrawled beside hers, records of pension funds diverted to finance vacations. One sheet even listed the purchase of Michael's new company car money, siphoned from an employee health plan. Each page was a nail in the coffin they had built for themselves. Margaret leaned over my shoulder, muttering, "They thought they were clever, but arrogance always leaves footprints." I nodded. For years, I had been silenced, told I was dramatic, spoiled, ungrateful. Now I had proof that they were the liars, the thieves, the parasites. Sophie whispered, "But what will you do?" "They will try to crush you if you show this." I looked at her, then at Margaret and Eleanor. "I will not hide anymore," I said. "If they want to fight, I will give them one." The plan began to form slowly, carefully. Eleanor advised me to file legal claims to let the courts unravel the fraud. But Margaret shook her head. "Legal battles take years. Emily needs to strike where it hurts their reputation." Eleanor agreed reluctantly. Public shame, she admitted, was the one thing Linda truly feared. Everything she built was an image of the perfect society wife. Destroy that image and you destroy her. The idea both terrified and thrilled me. I was still weak from illness, still shaken from nights in the car, but anger had hardened into resolve. I thought of Christmas Eve, the motel lot, the hunger, the neon vacancy sign, blinking like a cruel joke. I thought of their Instagram posts bragging about family while I froze alone. The fire in me blazed. They had taught me what cruelty felt like. Now, I would teach them consequence. Over the next week, we organized. Eleanor prepared copies of the documents notarized and sealed. Margaret reached out to contacts who could ensure the press would be present when the story broke. Sophie, for the first time defying her mother, offered to testify about the night they threw me out, her voice shaking but steady with conviction. It felt like assembling an army. Each ally strengthened me. Each piece of evidence fortified my courage. Still, fear gnawed at me. What if they found out first? What if they struck again? Then I reminded myself of my mother's words. For Emily, when she is ready to fight back. She had believed I would rise. I could not betray that faith. On the morning we finalized the plan, I stood before the mirror in Margaret's hallway. The woman staring back was not the girl who had begged for her father's love. Her eyes were sharper, her posture straighter, her face marked by hardship, but also by strength. I whispered to my reflection, "They thought they buried me, but they planted me instead." That night, I met with Eleanor one final time. She handed me a flash drive. "Everything is on here," she said. "Every theft, every forgery. If they try to deny it, this will end them." My fingers closed around the drive. "Thank you," I whispered. She shook her head. "Thank your mother. She is the one who saved this." As I left the cafe, snowflakes drifting in the streetlights, I felt both terrified and alive. For the first time in years, I was not running from their control. I was running toward justice. The confrontation happened on a night Linda had been planning for months. The grand Christmas banquet of Carter Foods, an annual tradition where the company's partners, investors, employees, and family gathered under chandeliers to toast success. It was held at the downtown hotel ballroom, decorated with gold and red ribbons, the tables glittering with crystal glasses, the air thick with perfume and anticipation. Linda thrived in settings like this. She glided across the room in a sequined gown, smiling that perfect smile she had practiced in mirrors, her arm looped through my father's Michael close at her side. To anyone watching, they looked like the perfect family, united, prosperous, untouchable. I stood outside the doors for a long moment, heart-pounding, clutching the flash drive and a folder of documents. My mother's will was in my bag, along with every page Eleanor had compiled. Margaret's voice echoed in my head. Public shame is the one thing Linda fears. Destroy her image and you destroy her. Sophie squeezed my hand. "Are you ready?" she whispered. I nodded, though my stomach churned. The girl who once begged for a seat at that table was gone. Tonight, I was not begging. Tonight, I was coming to take back everything. We entered quietly, no fanfare slipping through the crowd until I stood near the stage where Linda was preparing her speech. She tapped the microphone and the room fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "thank you for joining us tonight. At Carter Foods, we believe in family values and protecting the next generation in building a legacy of love and responsibility." Her voice dripped with false sincerity, each word twisting my stomach tighter. She spoke of generosity, of community, of integrity, and I could see the admiration shining in the eyes of the guests. They believed her. They did not know the truth. My hands shook, but I remembered that night in the car, frost crawling across the windows, my body starving while they toasted champagne in Aspen. Rage steadied me. When she lifted her glass to make a toast, I stepped forward. "Excuse me," I said loudly. The microphone screeched as I pulled it from its stand. Heads turned, whispers rippled through the room. Linda's smile faltered. "Emily," she said sweetly, "what a surprise. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Thomas's daughter who has been, shall we say, traveling." I held up my hand. "No, I have not been traveling. I have been homeless. Because my father and stepmother threw me out on Christmas Eve and changed the locks while I stood in the snow." Gasps filled the room. Michael froze, his jaw clenched. My father's face turned red. Linda's mask cracked, but she quickly forced a laugh. "Emily, really, this is not the place." But it was the perfect place. I turned toward the guests, my voice clear and strong. "You sit here celebrating family values while the woman on this stage destroyed her own stepdaughter, while she and my father stole money meant for employees, drained college funds, and forged documents to take what was not theirs." Silence fell heavy and suffocating. People shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between me and Linda. She tried to snatch the microphone back, but I pulled away. "If you doubt me, see for yourself." I signaled to Eleanor, who was waiting at the back. She pressed a button and the projector screen behind the stage flickered to life. The first image appeared, a photograph of me in the motel parking lot wrapped in layers of clothes, my face pale with hunger, my car buried in snow. Murmurs surged through the crowd. The next slide showed bank statements, transfers, highlighted signatures forged. Then the notarized, "Will my mother's handwriting clear and undeniable?" Finally, a recording played my mother's weak but steady voice from her final days. "I fear Linda is influencing Thomas. I fear for Emily. I have made provisions to protect her if my worst fears come true." Gasps turned to outrage. People whispered furiously, some shaking their heads, others glaring at Linda and my father. Linda's composure shattered. "That is a lie," she hissed. "She is ungrateful, a manipulator." My father finally stood, his voice booming. "Emily, stop this madness. You are tearing this family apart." I turned to him, tears stinging my eyes, but my voice unwavering. "I am not tearing it apart. You did that when you chose greed over love, when you let her erase Mom, when you watched me starve and did nothing." For the first time, he faltered, his shoulders slumping under the weight of truth. Margaret rose from her seat, her voice ringing out. "I can confirm everything Emily says. I have seen the documents. I have seen what they did." Eleanor stepped forward too. "I kept records for years. This is all real." Linda's face twisted with panic. She lunged for the microphone, but the sound of footsteps echoed through the hall. Detective Harris and 2 officers entered their presence, commanding instant silence. "Linda Evans and Thomas Carter, you are under investigation for fraud, embezzlement, and forgery," the detective announced. "Please step aside." The room erupted in gasps. Linda shrieked, trying to bolt, but the officers caught her wrists and snapped cold handcuffs around them. My father sank into a chair, his head in his hands, the fight gone from him. Michael stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing without words. The perfect family facade had crumbled in front of everyone. Phones flashed as guests recorded the spectacle. Their reputations, once polished and admired, shattered in seconds. I lowered the microphone, my body trembling with adrenaline and release. For the first time, I felt powerful. For the first time, I felt free. I turned back to the guests, my voice steady. Family is not about lies or greed. It is not about blood that betrays you. It is about loyalty, about those who show up when it matters. Remember that as you look at them and as you look at me. The room erupted in applause, some tentative, some thunderous. The tide had turned. No longer was I the invisible daughter, the burden. I was the survivor, the truth teller, the one who had stood up against cruelty and won. As the officers led Linda and my father away, I caught Sophie's gaze. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she was smiling. Margaret placed a hand on my shoulder. "Your mother would be proud," she whispered. And for the first time since losing her, I believed it. The days following the banquet felt like stepping into a storm I had long prepared for but never truly imagined. News of the confrontation spread quickly through the city. Articles appeared in local papers detailing the arrests of Thomas Carter and his wife Linda, the shocking revelation of embezzlement, and the betrayal of employees whose pensions had been drained to fund lavish vacations. Video clips from the banquet circulated online showing Linda shrieking as officers snapped handcuffs around her wrists, my father slumped in disgrace beside her. For the first time in years, the truth was not hidden behind their polished facade. It was out in the open for everyone to see. Court proceedings moved swiftly because Eleanor's meticulous records left little room for denial. Prosecutors presented evidence of fraud, forgery, and theft stretching back nearly a decade. Linda's smug expression vanished when confronted with documents bearing her forged signatures. My father tried to claim ignorance that he had trusted his wife with finances, but the prosecutors countered with emails showing his direct approval. In the end, there was no escape. Linda was sentenced to 5 years in prison for grand larceny and fraud. My father received 2 years for his role in the scheme and was ordered to make full restitution. The courtroom was silent when the judge delivered the verdicts. I sat with Margaret and Sophie on either side, my hands trembling but my heart steady. Watching them led away was not a moment of joy exactly, but it was a moment of justice. They had stolen my security, my home, my trust. Now they were stripped of their freedom and their reputation. Michael avoided charges, but his world collapsed all the same. With the company's shares restored to me through my mother's will, he found himself without the power he had once assumed was guaranteed. He tried to salvage his career, but the stigma of the scandal followed him, and whispers about his blind loyalty to Linda tainted his name. Eventually, he resigned from the company, retreating into obscurity. Sophie chose a different path. She moved in with me, cutting ties with the woman who had manipulated her for so long. For the first time, I saw her laugh without fear, her shoulders no longer weighed down by guilt. We began to rebuild together, sisters by circumstance and choice, not by Linda's control. For the employees of Carter Foods, the verdict was more than headlines. Restitution was ordered, stolen pension funds restored, benefits reinstated. Many of them thanked me in quiet voices, saying my courage had saved their futures. I told them it was not courage alone. It was my mother's foresight, Eleanor's loyalty, Margaret's strength, and Sophie's compassion. Justice was never the act of one person. It was the joining of many against lies. My father tried to call from prison once, leaving a message begging me to visit to remember that he was still my father. I listened to his words, but felt nothing. The man who should have protected me had chosen silence when I begged for love. His title as father did not erase that choice. I did not return his call. Linda wrote letters filled with venom, insisting I had ruined her life, calling me ungrateful. I never read past the first lines. She had already ruined her own life with greed. I owed her nothing. The consequences reached further than I expected. Families who once admired Linda distanced themselves, invitations vanished, and her name became a cautionary tale whispered at gatherings. The empire she built on lies crumbled overnight. As for me, I finally felt the weight of fear lifting. I was no longer the girl in the car starving in the snow. I was no longer invisible. Justice had carved space for me to breathe again, to dream again. Standing outside the courthouse after the sentencing, snowflakes drifting around me, I felt my mother's presence. The wind was cold, but my chest was warm with something deeper than victory. It was peace, hard-earned, fragile, but real. The consequences had been delivered, the scales balanced. The chapter of betrayal had closed. When the gavel fell and the sentences were handed down, it felt like the closing of one book and the opening of another. For so long, my life had been defined by survival, by betrayal, by the hunger and cold of that Christmas night when I thought I might disappear forever. Now, the air felt different, crisp with possibility. The company shares were restored to me, and with them, the responsibility of carrying forward a legacy my mother had always cherished. I renamed the flagship restaurant Caroline's in her honor, filling the walls with her recipes and photographs that Linda had tried so hard to erase. Employees who had once feared cutbacks now found security again. Their benefits reinstated, their wages fair. Walking through the restaurant and seeing families gathered around tables, laughter rising above the clatter of dishes, I felt the circle closing. The girl who had been cast out was now the woman who provided warmth to others. With Margaret's guidance and Sophie's encouragement, I established a foundation for homeless youth, especially those rejected by their families. I remembered every icy night in my car, every pang of hunger, and I vowed no child would feel as alone as I had. The foundation offered shelter counseling and scholarships. On the first day, we opened a line stretched around the block proof that pain could be turned into purpose. Sophie stood by my side through it all, our bond forged not by Linda's cruelty, but by our decision to choose each other. She enrolled in college nearby, free at last from manipulation, and on weekends she volunteered at the foundation, her laughter filling the halls. Margaret remained our anchor, her house always open, her voice a steady reminder that strength comes from standing firm even when the storm rages. Sometimes at night I would sit by the window of my new apartment watching the snow fall, remembering that motel lot. The image of frost crawling across the windshield still haunted me, but now it carried a different weight. It was no longer the sign of my ending, but the mark of my beginning. I had been tested nearly broken, but in surviving, I had become someone stronger than I ever imagined. My father and Linda sat behind bars, their power stripped away, their reputations ruined. Michael faded into the background, no longer able to stand tall on stolen wealth. The world they built on lies had collapsed, but from the rubble I built something new, and in that rebuilding I discovered the truth about family. It is not defined by blood or by the house you are born into. It is defined by loyalty, by those who stand beside you when you have nothing left, by the people who choose to love you when others turn away. Family is Margaret pulling me from the edge of despair, Sophie defying fear to rescue me, Eleanor protecting my mother's legacy even when it was dangerous. Family is the people who show up. On the anniversary of that terrible Christmas Eve, Sophie and I decorated a tree in Caroline's stringing lights the way our mother once did. Snow fell outside, thick and gentle, but inside the restaurant was warmth and laughter. Customers' toasted children tugged at parents' sleeves, music played softly in the background. I stood watching it, all my heart steady. They had thought they destroyed me that night. They thought by cutting me off and changing the locks they could erase me. Instead, they gave me the gift of freedom. In losing everything I discovered my own strength. In their betrayal, I found clarity. And in the coldest night of my life, I found the spark that set me free. Sometimes the best revenge is not anger or punishment. Sometimes the best revenge is living well, building something beautiful from the ashes and letting your enemies see that their cruelty only created your strength. I had learned the hardest lesson. The people who should love you may fail completely, but the family you build by choice can save your life. And as snow drifted past the windows, I whispered to myself, "Thank you, Mom. I made it."